Welcome to our escape room puzzle game known as EVE Online The Lost Bloods, set inside the EVE Online universe. This will be a walkthrough of our game demonstrating the various mechanics, puzzles and level design. I will also critically assess key elements of design such as how we manage to teach the player and test the player with what they have learnt in a fun way. Theories used through the development of the game that have helped us overcome problems shall also be referenced throughout the video. On that note, before we start the walkthrough, I would like the viewer to be aware of the following two theories which we have applied that we believe are the most important. One is a game's design technique used by Nintendo where they introduce a mechanic to a player in 4 stages known as Kisho Tenketsu. The principle behind this is to introduce the player to the mechanics, further develop the mechanics, provide a twist, and then a resolution to the mechanics. The other theory is that when designing puzzles within a game, we would also try to use logic as to why they are there, and not have them there for the sake of having the puzzles within the game. Therefore, whilst explaining the game, I will be given reasons as to why they are there, and why they seem logical and not misplaced within the EVE Online universe. The story covers a non-binary ranger from the Immortal Corps, a new faction we have created, captured by the Last Bloods for rituals. You are being tortured, but after a collision with another asteroid, the ship is abandoned by the Last Bloods. Debris falls in front of the player and they are trapped by the debris. Then out of nowhere, a rock slams the player in the head. Moments pass and the player wakes up. in an abandoned facility. This is where our game shall begin. The player must walk up to the door that is blocked by debris and start to remove the blocks, thus using the first mechanics introduced to the player, which is being able to pick up and move objects. Following Nintendo's design pattern, we believe this is a good and easy way to introduce the player to the pick-up mechanic. After removing the debris, the player walks through a maze, caused by walls being broken and debris due to the crash. Referring back to the theory mentioned before, we always want the player to feel like the puzzle is there for a reason and a logical one. Once out of the maze, a flashlight is on the floor. This is our second core player gameplay mechanic, which is being able to use a flashlight whenever they need by pressing the mouse key. As you may see, this is the main room. A ship is found in the middle, but missing parts, such as the engine cooler, engine oil, the power supply, and the engine itself. The player's goal is to recover the missing parts and escape. Each part is found in a different room. A problem we encountered when designing our game was the level layout, but after some great thinking we decided to make one of the rooms go underground, but we shall get to why we chose this specific room to be underground later on in the video. So let's start with the first room. This room is a sort of elevator which allows the Last Bloods to travel through the compound. However, after the collision, the room doesn't function properly, as a roof is collapsing on the player. To stop the collapsing, the player must figure out the puzzle. The player triggers the collapsing roof the minute he walks in. A clue is left on the board on how the room functions. The player must activate switches in a specific order to stop the roof. As you may notice, we have indicated right now which switch is correct, but when the player plays the game, the yellow banner will not be over the block and the block will be completely red, thus not showing the player which is the correct switch. This brings us now to our second stage of Nintendo's game design technique, the development stage. As you can see, the player must grab the cube, but instead of moving it out of the way, it must place it somewhere strategically in order to complete the puzzle. In this instance, to get up onto the platform. Once the player activates all the switches, the roof stops and the engine power supply is available to collect. This brings me on to another design element. We wanted each room to feel unique and different from one another. Let the player experience something different and not always repetitive. As you can see in this room, the roof is collapsing, but the other rooms will be quite different. Now moving on to the storage room, the player sees a clue on another board, talking about orichalcum, the strongest material known in the universe, and is informed that it can break almost anything. After the collision, a lot of material was taken by the surviving Blood Raiders, however the player notices some of it in a hole on the wall. The player to reach it must use cubes in order to gain height. Once they grab it, the player will see that they have half of the ball of orichalcum. Walking around the room, the player shall then notice that when he walks over a certain debris, a weird noise is triggered. If the player looks at the floor, they will remove the debris, and underneath is the other half. Now we can have a first look at one of our unique selling points, the crafting mechanic. The player can combine the two pieces and create the orichalcum ball. If the player doesn't have the two pieces, he cannot activate the crafting. Once the player creates a ball, the player can now notice that there are some pipes. One of them is slightly dented. If the player throws the ball, they can break the pipe. This refers back to Nintendo's design philosophy. This is where we introduced a twist into the mechanic, its third stage, which is that some objects can be thrown as well as picked up. Oil is now coming out. The oil needed for the ship, but this oil is too powerful to be contained in any ordinary bucket. A special container must be found. If the player returns to the storage room, they will see that a blood raider created a puzzle in order to retrieve this container. Once they complete it, the player can now retrieve the oil, and as you can see, the player can now place the oil inside the ship. As I mentioned before, we shall now be going downstairs to the bottom puzzle. The reason we chose to have this puzzle downstairs is because it fitted perfectly and logically with our story and theme. The bottom area of the ship is where you tend to find engine rooms. This engine room has been exposed to a gas after the collision, as one of the engine tanks broke. The player can't stay in the room for a very long time, and if they've travelled too far into the toxins will kill the player, and the game will restart outside the room with less time. Therefore, the player must locate two pieces of a mask to craft, scattered around the beginning portion of the room. Please note that for the walkthrough, we have placed them right next to the crafting bench to ease the walkthrough. After crafting the mask, the player can now see. The room is dark, however, and this means the flashlight must be used. This is considered the first real introduction and need for the mechanic. Again, the player must use the mechanic to pick up the debris to find a switch activating a lift to an even lower ground, where the engine cooler is found. Our final stage starts off by further developing the light mechanic. In this case, the player must hover the light over a panel, and that opens a locked door. While researching design theories on escape rooms, one technique that enticed us was misdirection. We wanted to fool the player for a moment, and we decided to do it here, by showing off an interesting room, and by also placing a cube at an unusual location. However, the room is simply scenery, and nothing is achieved inside. Once we enter the final stage of the last room, we place a purple coloured flashlight on the ground and a note, right in the middle, in order to guide the player to it. The note is a simple clue. The player can access them within the inventory system. As you can see, the clues talk about an ancient deity. However, the player is yet to uncover this. But by using the purple flashlight, they uncover letters on the wall. This is a UV light that can highlight blood scattered around the room. This features a twist within the flashlight mechanic. When discussing why would there be clues within the room, we decided to use the clues as notes from pages from the holy text of the Blood Raiders, scattered around due to the collision. Once the player uncovers the name of the deity, which is Sanar, they can now go to the keypad and enter the password. The player can unlock the last room and it finds the engine for the ship. We felt that the task of carrying the engine all the way to the ship was too tedious, like we did with the oil, and we decided to leave it inside the inventory. Now the player has all three parts and the engine wheel. The player can now successfully go into the ship and escape. Thank you very much for watching our video.